Hello there fellow NPCs, I'm Scythe, and today we're getting back into the house in Fata Morgana. But this is a Requiem for Innocence. Yes, this is the prologue to... Is it prologue? Epilogue? No. Sequel? Prequel to the main game, the house in Fata Morgana, where we're going to see how things more detailed played out. So yeah, we are starting here with Mr. Barnier. I still don't know how to say that name, so Barnier it is. Either way, with that said, let's go. Okay, so I just checked actually, because I can't stand not knowing, so I checked it's supposed to be Barney. Barney, something along those lines. Closer than Barnier at least. So let's continue. Cheers, a saint's blood and good fortune to all. Oh yeah. This is way before it all that happened, huh? Damn. Voices. So many voices. Laughing, laughing, laughing. Was this the 10th such party? The 20th? I no longer had any idea. The Lord's guest merrily drank of my blood. My father had not blessed me with his miracle, so wealthy nobles could fill their goblets with it. My blood was for the poor, for the infirm and the destitute. Why am I here? Why am I not doing my father's work? With each passing moment, my body grew colder and colder. While I'm mad, fiery fervor spread among the partygoers. Father, it hurts. My soul hurt far more than my body. It felt like I was cracked in a dozen places, about to shatter. Again and again, I told myself it was just a trial, that God was simply testing me, but I didn't think I could bear it much longer. A horrible black miasma spilled from the wounds of my flesh, filling the room. It was probably an illusion, something only I could see. The miasma soon began to consume my spirit. All my life I spent telling myself to be pure, just, righteous, and all of that was corroding away, ripping me asunder. Father, O Lord, of thy mercy, cut off mine enemies, and destroy all of them that inflict my soul. For I am thy servant. I am thy servant. Please, O Father, deliver unto these sinners thy holy judgment. Cast them down into the depths of hell. Ah, there we go. I was wondering what we were looking at. For the sins they would commit against thy faithful servant. Disguised as a prayer, I cursed them. For the first time in my life, I wished someone ill. I did what a saint, what a daughter of God must never do. And in that moment, I committed a sin greater than anyone else in that room. Oh. So it's more like a psychosomatic thing? You saw yourself as bigger sinner and you know, like placebo sort of thing? The girl, look at her face! I began to hear panicked voices rising up around the hall. However, I was completely oblivious to the cause of the unrest. In fact, I assumed that perhaps God had heard my wish and struck down some of the partygoers. The Lord marched over to where I sat in chains, grabbing me by the hair and yanking my head up. In his other hand, he held a sword. A disgusted grimace was carved onto his face, as though he was looking down at the filthiest thing in the world. You're a damn witch wearing a saint's skin! Oh. Okay. This is worse than I expected. The stench of rotting flesh hung in the air. Corpses was thrown about the room in varying states of decay. Blood pooled on the floor, black and thick as mud. An eyeball hung loose from one body, half decomposed and about as much as a liquid as it was a solid. On many, white bone was visible through patches of flesh that had rotted away entirely. Some had been worked to death. Others died of any numbers of diseases. And they were the lucky ones. Several bodies bore stab wounds from head to toe. Others looked like someone had tried to rip them in two. Some had been burned until their entire body shriveled. And some were covered in blisters. There was no shortage of people who had obviously been tortured. Though the man on the other end of the torture, the Lord Barney... oh shit, I forgot. Barney. Thought of it as more of a leisure activity. The Lord was spoken of in whispers as the second coming of the great tyrant of old. Though it wasn't until I snuck into his manor and saw it for myself that I truly understood how accurate that was. He was a damned psychopath. I apologize that I couldn't make it in time to save you all too. I'm hardly a religious man, but for you I think I can spare a prayer. Rest in peace. I'm not myself today, though I suppose that shouldn't be a surprise considering what today is. I wonder if that girl from the other day is among the dead. No, I need to stay focused. If this goes south, I'll be the one joining this pile of bodies. God, I'm starting to get a little nervous. Don't go weak in the knees now, Jacopo. How can I ever expect to go out into the world if I can't even keep myself together for something as straightforward as this? I can do this, no problem. Let's start ourselves a revolt. Okay, I should have put more effort into that one. It all began a little over 2 weeks earlier. The local lord's iron-fisted rule was destroying the commoners, and this went doubly for those living in poverty, who were barely scraping by before taxes. You could hardly take 3 steps out in the slums without hearing someone curse the Lord. I have no idea who first proposed the plan. Everything came together so smoothly, so quickly, it's almost a blur. Who started as their everyday litany of complaints hurled back and forth between the usual crew of young, indignant men in the pub, soon escalated, ballooning into a full-fledged plot to strike back. He treats us like dog shit! We're the ones working his goddamn land! Let's give the bastard what's coming! Over the next few days, word of the plot spread through the slums, and the number of volunteers grew at an impressive pace. And the more people we had on board, the more realistic it all started to become. While the original plan amounted to charging in headlong with whatever weapons we could scrounge together, it quickly evolved into a more sensible scheme to infiltrate the Lord's manor and free his slaves. It was no secret that the Lord was purchasing far more slaves than he should have any reasonable use for. What we didn't know was what he did with the slaves, that the banquets he so loved to throw were actually sick, sadistic torture parties. The best we could do was infer that living conditions were less than ideal from the fact that the Lord kept acquiring more. And while the plan to free the Lord's slaves was undeniably rooted in a righteous desire, I would be lying if I said everyone's intentions were so pure. We wanted to right an injustice, absolutely, but the prevailing desire was for vengeance, to give the Lord a little comeuppance. Part of it was also calculated, that it would be advantageous for it to look like a slave revolt rather than a civilian uprising. If we struck from the outside, we were liable to bring the Lord's wrath down upon more than just a handful of us involved. But if the blow came from the inside, he couldn't blame us. Secondly, the Lord's mansion sat atop a hill, which meant his soldier had the advantage of terrain. It would be nigh impossible for a band of lowly, ill-equipped peasants to break through his defenses, and we certainly didn't have the money to hire mercenaries. No amount of righteous anger was getting us anywhere near that manor. On the other hand, quietly getting one person inside to stir the pot was far more feasible. So ultimately, freeing the slaves was a means to an end. It was our best chance to deal the Lord a real blow. Of course, that didn't mean we wouldn't save as many people as we could, nor did it mean it would be easy to pull off, or that any of us would make it out alive. The plan went as follows. We would find a slave trader willing to sell one of us to the Lord. Once they had infiltrated, They would spread word of the scheme to the other slaves, trying to get as many of them on board as possible. Finding a slave trader willing to cooperate was surprisingly easy. They're businessmen, and slaves their product. While the majority didn't give a damn what happened to the slaves after they received payment, there were more than a few who were displeased knowing their precious wares were being squandered. Slaves are supposed to be long-term workers. They're not meant to be expendable. They require food and rest and some semblance of reasonable living conditions. It was far from a glamorous life, obviously, but most sensible slave owners at least had a vested interest in keeping their workers alive. However, that was far from the case with Lord Barney. Slaves were, of course, the property of whoever purchased them, and a mere slave trader had no place complaining about how they were being treated. That didn't mean the traders had to like it, though, and there was a small collective of them who staunchly refused to do business with the Lord, quietly mocking any who did. Nobody openly spoke ill of the Lord, let alone opposed him directly. Not only because this land was under his control, but because he was a madman, and everyone knew it. So they would help us get in, and nothing more. But that was fine. That was all we needed from them to put our plan into action. And the vanguard of our operation, the one who would infiltrate the Lord's manor, was me. So yeah, he was the slave, right. I volunteered for the position, partially in the heat of the moment, but also because I was confident I could pull it off. Above all though, I didn't want to believe that I couldn't manage such a straightforward task. I had to step up and take initiative or I would never escape this life as a poor, lowly slum dweller. Crawling through the dirt. Everyone, nobles and peasants alike, looking down on me, thinking I'm worthless. That would be me for my whole pathetic life. Like hell I was going to let that happen. I wanted to claw my way up, as high as I could manage. I didn't want to surrender to accept that I was powerless. I wanted to make something out of my one and only life. We chose the beginning of the Lord's next banquet for my infiltration. And that was when I saw the horror for myself. The abuse and the torture he put the slaves through. It was a goddamn blood banquet. Any mistake, no matter how small, would invite harsh discipline. If Barney was in a particularly foul mood that day, he would physically beat the wrongdoer. He had a particular fondness for activities that drew blood, though, and he would regularly gather together nobles with similar predilections at his manor. Never heard that word before. Oh shit, that's a person hanging from there in the one side. Fucking hell, dude, that is... Ooh, backbound and hung from the arms. Yeah, that's fucked. You're gonna break your arms that way, as, you know, dislocate them very painfully. Once a banquet had begun, it generally continued for around 2 weeks. Damn. The first thing I did after infiltrating was spread word of the plan to the other slaves. To be honest, I assumed it would be easy getting them to cooperate. They should have reviled Barney more than anyone after all. But I couldn't have been more wrong. Every ounce of willpower had been drained from them. They were malnourished, unrested and violently oppressed. I could hardly have convinced them to swat a mosquito. He had them completely under his thumb. Everyone was utterly terrified to fight back against Barney. They would just as soon take their own lives. Hardly a day in, and the plan already seemed to have hit a wall. A full week I spent trying and failing to convince a single soul to assist in the revolt. Just as I was beginning to fear it might not work after all. We need to talk. Oh yeah? Big, strong man! Very interesting that looks so well, considering he's a slave of Barney. Come with me. He was a tall, muscular slave who spent most of his time doing physical labor. Okay, different kind of slave, I guess. Despite the poor conditions, he seemed to be keeping himself in rather good shape. And unlike the other slaves, his eyes weren't filled with fear and resignation. But it wasn't hope I saw in them either. Rather, they looked like the eyes of a bloodthirsty wolf. And his sun-kempt greasy blonde hair only served to amplify the primal impression he gave off. Between that and the faint cocky smirk visible on his lips, he more resembled the head of a gang of ruffians than a slave. I wasn't sure it was entirely wise to accompany him anywhere. But against my better judgment, and with far too little information, I followed the man to the Great Hall. There were dozens or so nobles and upperclassmen and women clustered about the hall. The air was filled with the scent of aromatic herbs, and it wasn't long before I realized they were meant to mask the smell of blood. A large table was lined with plates stacked with piles of glistening dark red meat. Please don't be human meat. Noblemen sneered at us with wet lips as we entered the room. The contrast between the nobles' practiced graceful mannerisms and the grotesque feast of which they were partaking was so bizarre I simply stood there aghast. Human meat. There was no room for anger to form. The lord stood on a platform, like a small stage, at the far end of the room. That's Barney. Are you the slave who offered to be the day's entertainment? The buff man nodded, dropping down to one knee. What does he mean by entertainment? Surely you have tried of merely inflicting pain on helpless slaves. Would you, by chance, be interested in something a little more exciting? Could you be any more disrespectful? Lord Barney, you would do the best to rid yourself of a barbarian such as him. There, give the poor man a break. You can't expect an uneducated slave to be properly versed in the ways of polite society. Now, elaborate, slave. Me and him, we duel, right here, right now. Do you seriously think we haven't already pit slaves against each other numerous times by now? If that's all, tell me, were they vigorous as the two of us? Young and chomping at a bit? Well, if y'all want to see a couple of half-dead slaves simply flailing at each other, then help yourselves. But you're not gonna find many here what can give you a fight with some real oomph, you know? Hell, half the slaves here probably keel over with just a little shove. So I figure you might be up for a little change of pace. A barbarian like me. Whoa, I never agreed to this. Suck it up, you're a slave. Since when had you had the right to agree to anything? Holy crap, this is a difficult accent to read. You make a compelling argument. Requiem, was it? Ugh, crap, another name. Gratine. If it's Barnier, Gratine. My lord knows my name. I'm honored. I only remember because you came here very highly recommended. The slave trader said you were descended from a line of warriors that made a name for themselves fighting in the ancient Colosseum. I had assumed he was exaggerating. But perhaps there was some truth to it after all. You can say, couldn't tell you about my ancestors. But what I can tell you is that I just love a good duel. Fought in the Colosseum, descended from gladiators. Am I supposed to go one-on-one against him? Very well. Guards, bring these two swords. Sir. Shit. What is he hoping to accomplish? To win Barney's favor? I guess I just have to hope I can catch him by surprise as soon as... Hey, kid, listen up. What? Eyes forward. And keep it down. Listen carefully, don't get any wise ideas, got it? Just go along with it. Everything's on the level. What are you scheming? You'll find out soon enough, assuming you can handle a sword anyhow. Two guards approached us, each carrying a longsword. It was heavier than I expected, and it felt awkward in my hands. Both of our blades were badly chipped, clearly old and battle-worn. Of course, they wouldn't give new quality weapons to a pair of slaves, but a sword was still a sword. Beaten though they may have been, I still had to be careful or I'd be dead before I ever got the slave revolt off the ground. That said, I had survived this long in the slums. I wasn't completely helpless, and I had experience with a dagger. Though I wasn't sure how much help that would be now. The longer, two-handed weapon still felt awkward in my hands. As I squinted at the blade's hilt and adjusted my grip, trying to familiarize myself with the feel of it, Barney took a seat, readying himself to spectate. That's when I caught sight of what lay hidden at the back of the stage. What? I stood there, staring agape, completely forgetting I was but moments from a duel with a man twice my size. At the back of the stage was what looked like an altar, draped in a thick white sheet, and stained red. Atop it sat a young girl, covered in gashes. Her head was drooped, so I couldn't see her face. But judging from her size, I didn't think she could be more than 10 years of age. Some wounds were older, and had already scabbed over. Some were swollen, bright red protrusions on her pale skin. Some were oozing pus, and others were so fresh they were still bleeding. It was difficult to find a part of her body that wasn't cut. Hey, what do you think you're doing to that girl? I don't care who you are, no one deserves that! Even as I shouted at the Lord, the girl remained motionless. She seemed unconscious. Not dead yet, but it wouldn't be long. Silence, cur. I don't recall giving you permission to speak. Or if you'd rather lose your head right now, continue on as you are. Damn despot. Now go on, get started. Give us a show befitting of this grand affair. Fighting my urge to snap back at him, I turned to face the slave named Gratin, whatever. The other guests lined the walls, whispering among themselves, speculating about their potential victor. The crowd was so overwhelmed in Gratin's favor, to absolutely no surprise. They didn't even bother taking bets. Try not to get down in one blow, kid. Hold on, what's the point of this? Slowly, Gratin lowered into a crouch, and the next second he leapt at me like a tiger. There was an audible whoosh, and before I even had the time to gasp, he was merely inches away. What choice do I have? I swung my sword up, catching Gratin's blade mid-descent and attempting a parry, but there was far more weight in his strike than I had expected. The impact caused my hands to sting painfully and my knees to buckle. I clenched my teeth, trying, at the very least, to hold my ground. Ah! Gratin barely gave me his time to recover, let alone strike back, before launching into a second attack. He handled the longsword so effortlessly, swinging it through the air in such impressive, perfect arcs, that I could hardly believe we were both using the same weapon. Ah! I twisted out of the way, but not quite in time. The tip of his blade skimmed the skin on my neck. Ooh! And then, not even giving me a chance to catch my balance, he thrust his blade at me. While I managed to deflect the attack just in time, I wasn't able to follow through. Meanwhile, a wide mocking smirk spread across Gratin's face. He seemed to be having at the time of his life. Hey, come on, kid, you're gonna have to do better than that if you want to keep your head. Oh! I rattled off several insults in my head, but unlike him, I couldn't spare the energy to put them into the words. Pick it up, boy! Oh! God damn! That's all you got, kid? I thought you'd be fare a little better. Shut your damn mouth! I was stuck on the defensive, and with every strike it pushed me farther and farther back. I was almost up against the wall. I thought he said it was part of some plan. Or was he just trying to get me to let my guard down? Or he's pushing you closer to some nice nobles to slice up. He's conspiring with the Lord, it must be. Why challenge me to a duel, though? Did someone spill the words of the plan to him? Come on, give me your best shot, boy! Oh! Yes, very funny. You know damn well I'm barely managing as it is. You gotta at least try. Don't want to put our audience to sleep now, do we? Even the bones in my forearms are starting to sting. I don't know how much longer I can keep this up. Here, let me show you how it's done. God, I can't get a damn inch on him. Much more of this and I'll be up against the wall. I'm dead if I don't go on the offensive. That's my last chance. While I've still got breathing room. Hey, Big High, you may think you have the advantage, but not for long. Haha, that's rich. Coming from a guy who can't even get a one swing in on me. It was all a trick to get your guard down. I've been saving this one just for you, meathead. Good luck dodging it. With that hulking body of yours. Now that's more like it. Let me have it, kid. I hopped backward a couple of paces until my heels were pressed up against the wall. There was no backing down. Not anymore. Breathing heavily, I lifted my blade, pointing it at Gratine. He pointed his in return, a cocky grin plastered on his face. And then, I kicked off the ground, hard, sending me flying towards him. My sword held down near my waist, his above his head. And then, whoosh. He whiffed, his blade ripping through the air just over my head. The mere force of the gale created by his swing was so intense. For a brief moment, I thought he might have knocked my head clean off my shoulders. But I was still breathing, and despite exhaustion, my mind was incredibly clear and focused. I hadn't swung up at him, but slid across the floor. Your back's wide open. I lurched to my feet, spinning around, and swung my sword at his neck with everything I had. Oh! No! What? But my would-be grand comeback was deflected from behind without a bat of an eye, and hardly a wimpy deflect for that matter. My hands felt like they were on fire. Little bit on the dirt side I was, but hey, not half bad, kid. Damn it! Just a little more oomph on that to that swing and you might have landed it. Too bad, too bad. I don't stand a chance against him head on, but he's not one to fall for the same trick twice. I need a new plan. Back against the wall with you. Son of a... Oh! What's the matter, kid? That's all you got? After all that talk, I was expecting a little more from you. Oh. Oh. He's got me completely under his thumb. I'm dead if I don't do something, but I can barely lift my arms anymore. It's getting harder to breathe. My vision's going blurry. I can't die yet. Not here, not now. Not to this damn brute. There has to be something. An opening I'm not seeing. Anything. Some way to turn the tables. Oh, that was different. Am I imagining it, or did I react to that quicker than usual? Is he doing what I think he's doing? Patterns were forming in my mind. I'd been through this routine so many times now, my body instinctively knew what came next. I'd parried his strike entirely by reflex. I wasn't so full of myself to think it was a sign I was gaining the upper hand. As much as I loathed to admit it, he had a very imaginable advantage over me. I should have realized what I was doing sooner, but I'd been so focused on keeping my head attached and my sword in my hands that I didn't have the spare mental capacity to see beyond that. He was in complete control. The only reason I was able to keep up with him was because he was letting me. Because he was repeating the same sequence of attacks again and again, which also explains the images we were seeing of the swings. They were the same all the time. If I'm right, then next, he'll come from above. Ha ha ha! Right on the money. A clang, like the pealing of a bell, echoed through the hall of our blades collided. It was a much cleaner, more satisfying sound than they had made when I was struggling to keep up. I still don't know what he was scheming, but I'm not going to throw away this chance to win back some ground. Sparks flew with each clash of our swords, and Gratine's smirk grew wider. I could hear murmuring bubble up in the gathering as the tides turned. Cheering, cursing, confused gasps. But before long, the sound seemed to grow distant. It was just me and Gratine, in a bubble of silence. Not even the sound of metal striking metal. My heavy breathing, the stomping of our feet, the distracting loud pounding of my heart, the blood pumping through my veins. It all whisked away into nothing. Yeah, it's getting darker, isn't it? Every one of my senses were focused on exactly two things. The image of our swords cutting clear arcs through the air, and Gratine's intent. That's next. That's it, next overhead. He whispered so quietly that by all rights, I could never have heard it, but his intentions came through loud and clear. As if being controlled by that voice, I swung my sword down. After about a half dozen such classes, we locked the blades and had a brief showing match before putting a little distance between each other. Then we went at it again. To the audience, oh, the music is getting more silent too, as we are not hearing it anymore. Huh. To the audience, it would have looked like a fierce battle to the death, but I felt more like we were dancing than anything. Well, he was dancing, I was merely following his lead. But if that was the plan, whatever his plan was, I had no choice but to dance to his beat. The only thing improvisation would get me is a sword through the heart. Meanwhile, sticking to the plan, I had nothing to worry about, no reason to fear his sword might go off course. After several more fierce clashes, we got in close again. We were both breathing pretty heavily by that point. I was drenched in sweat and I felt like I'd collapse right then and there if I loosened up even for a second. Gratine tossed a glance off to the side of the briefest of moments. His lips came together, curling up into a smile. Listen up. 3 paces back, then charge. Swing down as hard as you can. Put everything you got into it. As soon as I signaled my acknowledgement, Gratine parried my sword off to the side. 1, 2, 3 paces back. Then I gathered my strength into my legs. I crouched, like I had at the beginning of the duel, envisioning myself as a tiger ready to pounce. And then, we leapt at each other in perfect sync. What? The harsh sound of metal striking metal, more piercing than anything else up to that point. For a heartbeat, the world went white. Then, the whoosh of something ripping through the air. It wasn't for another second or two that I realized what had happened. Breathing heavily, I looked down at the sword in my hands, only to find half of it missing. Gratine's blade appeared to have snapped as well. The gallery began buzzing. Are you alright? How dreadfully dangerous! A perverse grin spread across Gratine's lips. I finally understood what he had been scheming. He wanted his swords to break, and he wanted it to look like an accident. Hoping that when the shattered blades went flying, a noble or two would be caught in the crossfire. That explains the whole song and dance, why he had us hitting each other's blades in the same spots again and again. But how the hell would he ever expect that to work? That said, if the fight had gone on much longer, I don't think I would have lasted. His plan seemed to have gone about as well as you could reasonably expect. One piece landed near Barney, and the other embedded in a table. That's fine by me. I'd rather avoid causing any more of the scene before the actual revolt. Not that I would be opposed to seeing any of these madmen skewered. Gratines wiped the sweat from his brow with the back of his hand and surveyed the room. And as obvious outclassed as he was by all the nobles, he still seemed much larger than anyone else in the room. He took a few moments to catch his breath, then sauntered over to the center of the great hall, taking another good look around the room before saying, Apologies for the disturbance, my lord. While ordinary duel is supposed to end with someone dead, it looks like that out of the question today. So maybe we can reschedule. Put on another show in a day or two, if you'd like. Barney seemed less than pleased with the outcome, but considering how rattled his guests were, he couldn't press the matter either. Very well. Now, I believe you two deserve a reward for such a fine show. Ooh, what kind of reward? One I'm sure you'll be quite pleased with. The leftovers from today's feast. Gourmet cuisine the likes of which you mere slaves could only dream of getting your dirty hands on. You mean those bleeding scraps of mystery meat? Worry not. There's pork in there. Or does your religion prohibit you from eating pig? Nah, I gave up religion long ago. I'm fine with eating meat. Most meat, anyway. I'll have the other slaves bring it down this evening, then. Now, the show's over. Be gone with you. Gone we be, my lord. I'm still concerned about that girl, but there's nothing I can do for her right now. Hopefully she lasts long enough for the revolt, but with wounds like that... Hey, kid. Pick a bait ass up and let's get out of here. I am not beat, thank you very much. Who are you trying to fool when you're wheezing up along? Getting huffy about it only makes you look more pathetic. Piss off, you inhumane monster! Now, do have a wonderful day, ladies and gents. Once we were out of the hall and in the corridor, I took several deep breaths, finally letting loose some of the tension that had built up within me. But that would be the end of today's video. Strong start. Whoa! Am I going into a second puberty here? What the hell's happening? Strong start, but it is very different from the first Morgana game. But yeah, that's going to happen when we are taking on a different main character and a different type of story. So we'll just have to wait and see how this develops. Now, my question is, how do you think this game compares to the other? Are they equally good? This one is supposed to be a lot shorter, I believe. Or is it way less than the original game? You let me know what you think, without spoilers of course. But either way, thank you guys for watching, and an extra thank you to all the members of this channel. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll be seeing you guys in the next one. Goodbye everyone.